So speaking as a national treasure, I was standing there and I was thinking, yeah, I kind of am. And my mind went back, it's been about 12 years ago now. I was on the Washington Mall at the National Book Festival that Mrs. Bush organized. And I was on my way at that point to give my talk about Andrew Jackson. And a woman ran up to me, which doesn't happen enough, or ever, actually. And she said, "Oh my God, it's you." And I said, "Well, yes, you know, existentially speaking, that's hard to argue with, you know." I live in Tennessee, so I have to leave the state to use existential as an adverb. And she said, your books have meant so much to me. Will you wait right here? I'm going to go buy your new book and have you sign it. And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I stood there thinking, this is the way the world is supposed to be, right? Hand to God, she brought back John Grisham's latest. No. So, whenever I think I'm a national treasure, I remind myself that somewhere in America there's a forged copy of The Runaway Jury. And this is the only audience in America that will appreciate the second part of that story. I was writing the book about President Bush Sr. at that time. It was supposed to be posthumous, but he wouldn't die. Yeah, not going to do it. And I was on my way to see the Bushes, and for some reason it was just the three of us at lunch that day in Maine. And as you all know, Bushland was like a WASP Epcot. You know, Gorbachev would be on the putting green, the Oak Ridge boys would be there, you know, but it was just us. And I told the story about being mistaken for John Grisham, and I will confess to you, it was an entirely transparent attempt to get either the former president or the former first lady to say, "Oh, you're so much more important than John Grisham," right? So I cast out the bait, and Barbara Bush looks across the table in that inimitable way of hers and says, "Well, how do you think poor John Grisham would feel? You know, he's a very handsome man." So it was a bad weekend. On to democracy. Washington was riven with rumors as the new year began. Insurrection was a consuming fear. A former governor of Virginia was said to be raising a 25,000-man army to prevent the newly elected president from taking office. Others reported plots to poison the horses of the military, destroy the Capitol building, hang members of the victorious party. Yet another rumor had protesters arriving with concealed arms, bribing federal troops, and seizing government buildings. Treason, a Nashville correspondent warned officials in Washington, is all around you. It was 1860-61. Winfield Scott, the commanding general of the U.S. Army, stepped into the breach. Anyone, he announced, who attempted by force or parliamentary disorder to obstruct or interfere with the lawful count of the Electoral College would be lashed to the muzzle of a 12-pounder and fired out a window of the Capitol. So much came down to a single man and a single moment. The Vice President of the United States, John Breckinridge, who was to certify the election for Abraham Lincoln. Breckinridge was the object of all eyes on Wednesday, February 13th, 1861. It was the January 6th, 2021 of the era. 100 plainclothes police from New York and Philadelphia were stationed in the Capitol, prepared for any emergency. Breckinridge did his duty with, as a contemporary recalled, Roman fidelity, and the nation was saved. As a Kentuckian, Breckinridge, a future Confederate general and member of Jefferson Davis's cabinet, opposed secession at that juncture. And as Vice President of the United States, he honored his oath and acted according to constitutional principles. Democratic elections can only long endure in that kind of moral covenant, a covenant in which we accept commonly agreed upon rules, a covenant in which we see each other not as enemies, but as neighbors, not as combatants, but as fellow citizens, a covenant in which the Constitution is seen as protecting your rights and my rights. It is striking and dispiriting to even have to note this. But we do ourselves no favors by pretending that we're in anything other than an hour of destructive distrust, an hour in which the will to power at any cost is seeking to displace the will of the people. This is not hyperbole, and it is surely not partisan. I am neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I have voted for presidential candidates of both parties. And I speak to you now as a historian of the American past and as a citizen of the Republic that only 16 months ago came as close as we have since Fort Sumter to losing the constitutional ethos that has shaped our lives for almost 250 years. History, though, does give us some grounds for hope. Again and again in the American story, there have been moments when the experiment could have come to an end, the victim of a single man or a single party, and their thirst for dominance at the expense of democracy. Think of the stakes. Democracy depends on elections, and democracy is the articulation, maintenance, and defense of the Jeffersonian rights of innate God-given equality. Equality before the law over and against demagogues who seek control over the common good. And there is no more vivid contest in which to see that which vision will prevail, that of brute power or that of the democratic rights of all, than in elections. In 1864, 4 years after the drama we just discussed, amid the Civil War, it was a credit to the constitutional system that the election went forward at all, and that President Lincoln was openly committed to accepting an outcome adverse to his own interests. From age to age, what I'd suggest we think of as constitutional character has validated American elections. Constitutional character. In 1800, John Adams accepted a narrow defeat at the hands of Thomas Jefferson, peacefully ceding ultimate power in the new republic. Adams did so because he believed in the Constitution even more than his not inconsiderable personal ambition. A quarter of a century later, Andrew Jackson, who was hardly the most placid of public figures, thundered against what he called a corrupt bargain, arguably the first hashtag in American history, that had cost him the presidency in the House despite his winning the popular vote. Yet that thundering took place from Nashville, not at the head of an army on the banks of the Potomac. Jackson did what statesmen of a constitutional character should do. He accepted the result, however much he hated it, and ran again according to the rules, and he won. At either end of the 1960s, Richard Nixon declined to pursue the closest of results against John F. Kennedy, and then 8 years later, Hubert Humphrey accepted an equally narrow margin of defeat. And in 2000, both Al Gore and George W. Bush demonstrated great constitutional character amid crisis and uncertainty. A winter Wednesday, December 13th, 2000, is a landmark date. In Washington, Vice President Gore conceded the election, saying, "I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy." In Austin, President-elect Bush drew on 1800, on Adams and Jefferson, to call the nation to unity, quoting Jefferson, who said, "The steady character of our countrymen is a rock to which we may safely moor, unequivocal in principle, reasonable in manner." President-elect Bush added, 200 years have only strengthened the steady character of America, and so tonight I call upon that character, respect for each other, respect for our differences, generosity of spirit, and a willingness to work hard and work together to solve any problem. Constitutional character. No matter how our laws are framed, American elections depend upon the character of the powerful and of the people, the character of a Jefferson or an Adams or a Gore or a Bush. That's because elections are not clinical, but human enterprises. And they are the oxygen of democracy, for without them, democracy dies. Covenants only hold when all parties hold up their side, win or